Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Catalyst session. I'm your host and Catalyst supervising producer, Nikki Coble, and today we have a very special event for you. This is an introduction to the world of color with pro colorist and finishing editor, Jamie Dickinson. Welcome, Jamie.
Hello. Thank you for
Hello.
having me on here.
You're so welcome. We're so excited that you're joining us. And I don't know if those who are just tuning in will know just how special it is that you are with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in working in film and television?
Yes, I started in film and television at the BBC nearly 30 years ago. I was a trainee engineer and a tech op in news. I worked in the studio, so I learned color balancing cameras. I did a bit of telecine, transferring film archive onto videotape and out to air. And all of that kind of training and that background has been so helpful throughout my career, because I then moved on to kind of graphics and short form promos, things like that, and then went into long form. So about 10 or 12 years ago, went into long form color grading, but also online editing, to use that term.
Mm-hmm.
Finishing editor and colorist.
I love that. And we're so lucky to have you because I find that a lot of times for new creators or new multi-hyphenate creators, right? Actors who want to direct something that they've written or work with their friends, we don't often know kind of the world of post seems like a dream vacation wherein you go and your whole life is fixed and it's beautiful and it's suddenly very expensive. But that's sort of a misnomer. A, it doesn't have to be expensive, and B, it doesn't fix your whole life. You
Yes.
do have to set yourself up well. But it seems like some mystical place wherein all our problems will be solved. We'll just fix it in post. And I would love for you to share a bit about what that actually means. And if you're just tuning in and joining us, please feel free. Jamie will be able to answer questions at the end of the broadcast or during. He's got a little presentation for us. But if you're going to comment below with one of your questions, please do just leave your name or give StreamYard, YouTube, or Facebook permission to use your name so we can address you personally and answer your questions. So without further ado, Jamie, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us the presentation.
Yes. Okay. I'll just share my screen here. Click a few buttons, and so you
And
can
this
add
is so
that. Yeah.
And this is so special because I really do feel like it's something that's meant to be experienced. You have to be able to see what we're talking about. We're talking about color. We're talking about light. It's not
Yeah.
a cerebral idea. It's a tangible thing that you're sharing with us today. So thank you for that.
Well, absolutely. It's not something you can just talk about the theory. But I'm not going to get all that deep into the theory of it.
Of
I
course.
think the takeaway is like you said, learning about the world of post. It's just to be aware of what you can, the magical fix in post. And actually it's not magic, and a lot of the time it's much better to fix it on set, and it's not a
Right.
problem on
Right.
in post. And it's getting that balance, isn't it? We were discussing this the other day, you and I, getting that balance, using your budget most effectively. If you've got a huge budget, then great, you've got all the lights and you can get everything 100% or almost 100% on set, and then the colorist job is really quite easy. um, on the other hand, if you've got a small budget, you have to uh, budget for color grading and problems that you couldn't fix on set. So it's the proportion of your budget, I guess, has
Mhm.
to change depending on how big the budget is. So
Certainly.
just to be aware of what happens in color grading. And as I said, I'm a finishing editor, and it used to be called an online editor. The idea of offline editing with low quality footage, and then online editing with the full high quality footage on more expensive equipment with calibrated monitors. And that's often hand in hand with the color grading, the final finish of your project.
Hmm. And even I think it's important to mention that some of this happens in pre-production, in the discussions of
Mm.
what you want the world to look like. Is it a grimy, post-apocalyptic, can't even say the word, post-apocalyptic, green, gray world? Is it sort of that that blue world of the procedurals? Is it a bright and shiny world like an ABC comedy? These are things that you want to know ahead of time, discussions you want to have with your DP, so that your colorist isn't trying to extract that from something you didn't capture, right?
So
Or something that's
so
probably in
true.
progress.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, to be handed some footage that's lit in one way, and then told to grade it a totally different way. You know, I've actually said that to a client. Well, why did you shoot it like that if you wanted it like this? You know,
Yes.
because it's hard for me then. Whereas the DP might have just been able to put in a bit of fill light and change that. That look and feel, or art director on set can do things which add to the look, because the overall look of something, it's not just, oh, I apply a look in the color. It's as you said, talk to the DP, the art direction, if that's even such a thing, you know, just be aware, and get everyone talking in pre-production, you know, talk
Mhm.
to the DP. And if director, DP, colorist are all on the same page, things should be much smoother. It's when
Mhm.
uh, if like as an afterthought, you say, yeah, actually, I'm going to go for the post-apocalyptic look,
Yes.
but you know, it's not been lit with that in mind. And then as an afterthought, the well, yeah, if the colorist, I it's becoming more important actually as a colorist that I can talk to the DP, the
Mhm.
cinematographer, the camera person, because um, uh, a lot of the time people are using different cameras, and the tech involved now it can really help you,
Right.
but it can be a real minefield. And if I can talk to the DP and say, well, what camera did you use and what settings did you use, then fantastic. That's actually got me halfway to grading it potentially.
Right.
But if somebody says, "Oh, I don't know, DP's not here, no idea what he did," then all of those potential advantages, from my point of view, they go out of the window, and then I'm guessing, and I think,
Right.
well, this kind of looks nice, and you know, so it's again, it's effective use of time and budget. It's getting everyone talking, so that you're all on the same page.
Mhm. And those rates can often be flat. It depends on where you are in your budget. If someone's able to color for you at a specific rate for just a finishing touch. But if it's really going to be specific and you do have all those questions, that's going to be expensive because it's going to be more time for you to take to solve all of those questions.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the most important things for the creators to know is it's important to know what you don't know. And for certainly for myself as a producer, on one of my larger projects, my DP was also my colorist. So he was able to tell me we weren't able to look at locations together, which is something I would never do that way again. But we were, say, shooting in a wine shop, and all of the lighting in there gave off an inherent hue. The types of bulbs gave off a green light, kind of like what's happening behind me with like an LED. So there was a green light that was just sort of a film over everything. And if he put up his lights to try to light the whole space, they'd be giving off a magenta color. So then when you're starting to color grade, your blacks start to take on those qualities. So your black clothes will suddenly shift to another color, or whites will do the same. That's why you often find that wardrobe wise, you're asked not to wear either all white or all black. And so it's really finite adjustments, but they're so important. So in that instance, we were shooting a wine shop, and he said that he couldn't light it all the way to the back. He couldn't light the whole space because his lights wouldn't reach that far, and we weren't allowed to use the ones because they had a different inherent quality of the color they gave off. So we kind of had to be creative about that. Definitely things that would be important to know from the start.
That's a really interesting scenario. The idea of mixed color temperature lighting and trying to make it force it to look one way or another, either daylight or tungsten. But you've got some weird fluorescent lamps in there as well, and a lot of artificial lights. They look to your eye, or to one person's eye, they look one color, and to
Right.
another person or another sensor, like you look at it on a iPhone or a different camera, they've got
Mhm.
spikes in the spectral response that you just can't see it, but
Right.
then you look at it on a phone and you think, oh my god, it's that green sheen to somebody's face that you
Yes.
couldn't see. So all of those things, really really important. Yeah, I've got a shot we can play with in a minute, that shows that, and what lessons there are there. Yeah, that's really interesting scenario.
Hmm.
Shall I just skim through this?
Oh, yes, please.
If I just make this a little bit bigger so that we can see it. This is it's quite an old sort of intro to what the whole topic is. I set this up a while ago for something I did with Dartmouth College when I was living in the States. So it's some of it's not relevant now. If I just talk about this, basically, yeah, we're all about we want to control how the image is captured, which is obviously on set, the type of camera, the type of lighting, and then there's a path through, be it Vimeo or and your edit and Lord
Yes.
knows what else, to a screen. And the screen will have a defined industry standard color space and gamma. That's the sort of tonal response. So these are standards that we have to know about, and rather than getting easier in the world of digital where we've all got flat screen LCDs, it's actually getting more complicated, because I haven't even listed half of the newer ones. We've got high dynamic range, we've got Dolby Vision for the cinema, there's all sorts of things. The main one that I talk about when I'm introducing things is HD video. It's a industry body, a standard called Rec 709, and the gamma is usually it's 2.4 gamma, but even that is a big discussion. So a whole can of worms there we could talk about.
Hmm.
And then it's something else for cinema. It's P3 is the color space. But a lot of this happens under the hood. You take a picture on your phone and you put it onto a screen. It just happens, and
Hmm.
you know you hope it looks right. And as a colorist and camera person, you want control of that. So you want to perhaps you don't want to just say, right, it's going to go to an HD video screen, so I'll shoot it like that. And then you find, oh well, actually I can't expose for this person's face and the window that's behind them. So
Right.
I have to make a choice. And for a long time, I mean, in TV, that was you'd see that on lower budget or broadcast news or whatever. Make a choice for the face. Can't see anything that's going on in the window behind them because it's all just
Yep.
blown out and
No, no.
overexposed. Because that's where there's no grade involved. Now we know we are going to color grade it. So if we shoot in a log, a very flat looking image, and I'll talk about this in a minute, that will preserve those highlights and shadows, and everything is captured into the file, into your what you've recorded. And then you can decide, okay, well, it's going to go to cinema, it's going to go to the web or onto broadcast, and we are going to grade it, and we get complete control. So that's an
Mhm.
important thing. This whole thing about log, which until probably 10, 12 years ago, not that many cameras would do it, and people would just say, "Oh, why does it look all milky and washed out and horrible?"
Right.
And then people thought, "Oh, actually, I mean, there was a trend. People would say, 'Hey, I like that look. I've never seen that before. I'll have that in my commercial,'"
Mm.
which was a horrible idea, I thought, but there we are.
Well, but it's
Um,
true in that a lot of the content that we create that's just going to be meant for the web, but we do hope to have a screening. The way
mm,
that it screens it's projected light, which is different than the light that,
Yeah.
which is different than the way that we view what happens on our screens in our phones, because that's not the same conveyance of the way
Yeah.
that the images are going to be presented. So, we had a separate DCP for my project, which is different than the way that things were for our everyday use. So you kind of
Right.
hope that it serves both. And if you have Marvel, you can color one for one and one for one, but for differently for each medium. But if you're not, and we don't have those budgets, most of us don't, we need to make these considerations ahead of time and make those choices.
Well, I've got to say the software is getting really clever at that. I'm going to just show you really kind of the basic. I'm not getting into the color management, but in recent years, the software does allow for color management, where you get everything, all of your footage, wherever it came from, you get it into a common kind of format, a color
Mhm.
space, and then at the end, you could say, right, I'm looking at it, I'm making my creative decisions on an emissive display, like you were saying. It could be a OLED TV or an LCD TV that's emitting light at you, or you might be grading in a big grading theatre with a projector. And so you can tell the software, right, you've got everything looking good within under the hood, but we're currently looking at a projector, so
Mhm. Mhm.
P3. And then the theory is the theory is you flip over one setting, and it's clever enough to say, oh, okay, right, now you're going to go to HD video, Rec 709 2.4 gamma instead of P3 2.6, and it flips it over and it looks essentially the same. I mean, that's the
What a
theory.
time to be alive.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Much different,
You do need to do a little trim and a look over it.
of course.
And it's good that the software is now getting this clever to do it. There are just so many permutations, and you've got to be careful that you've got it set up correctly. I'm keeping it simple in what I've got. I'm not using any kind of color management, so it's what they call display referred. It's basically, I've got a monitor here. If it looks good, it is good, and then if somebody says put it out to something else, it's a bit more complicated.
Yes.
And that brings us on to monitoring. If your monitor is not at a fixed, a known calibrated color space and gamma, then if it could be way too blue and a bit too bright. So what am I going to do? I'm going to make it look right on my monitor. I'll add a load of yellow and I'll darken it down.
Mhm.
You look at it on your monitor and you say, why is it yellow and dark? Oh, that's horrible. You say,
Mhm.
can't overstate enough. Probably the most important thing, the biggest investment a colorist will have is the monitor. I spent way more on my first monitor when I was setting up my sort of home grading suite, way more than I did on any of the other equipment. You can limp through with a bad computer, but if you can't trust the monitor that you're looking at, that was a $5,000 monitor, then it's all for nothing. It's all about the confidence of what you're viewing.
Well, the rest of us only know it from wandering through Best Buy or wandering through a sports bar and going, how come the game is green over there and red over there? I don't understand. It's
Yeah, and
truly that sensitive that
Best
you need to
Buy,
make sure you're the baseline.
yeah, in a way, those stores like that, they just want to sell their TV, so they've even got demo modes where it's just massively bright and colourful, and if you took it home and did not reset it to something sensible, it's just awful, but it stands out in the shop, so
Truly.
that's how they want to sell it. So yeah, this is a graph. This is based on a graph that was made in, I think, 1931, but it's the sort of theoretical, the visible colors that you can see. And Rec 709 is a small space in here. So we define the white point as D65. That's a color temperature. 6,504 Kelvin or something. We've got a green point, a red, the primary is the blue, and the white is defined there. There are that will be a different shape and encompassing different visible colors and even theoretical colors that go off the graph that you can't even see and that no display can show. So that's an important way to define what you're looking at. I always include this fantastic acronym. I love to work at the BBC. Picture lineup generating equipment, the PLUGE. If you can see, now I don't know, yeah, I'm looking at two different monitors here. This should be black. If you do nothing else to your monitor, try to get the black levels correct. So this should be black. This should be just visible. And can you see there's a very dark stripe, a patch here? Right, you shouldn't be able to see that. If your monitor and the whole signal path is correctly aligned, that is actually sub-black. That's 2% below, that's 2% above. So once you've set that up, and there are presets for SMPTE color bars. They've got a little patch like that, or 3 patches, in fact. So if you do nothing else, put some bars on your program, look at it, and then if you see it's gone through your whole your post-production chain and you see it on YouTube or something, and you can see your color bars have these patches which are meant to be underneath black, then you know you've got a problem. So if you do nothing else, get that right. That's a huge part. And then there's, as I said, there's the gamma, which sort of affects these midtones, and then the white point. That's harder to measure. But there are incredibly expensive probes which measure the output of the light on your TV as well. So yeah, can't overstate that enough. Trust your monitor. This, I think, I've never used this, but these are the controls that they used to have in the days of film. Just basically 3 lights. So you could go plus or minus on the red, green, blue. So minus would give you cyan or magenta or yellow, and then an overall density. And it was all about the film stock in those days. So if you had a very contrasty film stock that responded to light in a certain way, that was kind of fixed in the film. And the saturation, the amount of color that it showed, or if it was black and white, that was essentially fixed. So those are the only controls they had back in the day, and they're mimicked down here. Actually, you'll see some numbers here. This starts at 25, so I can go up or down on printer lights, and it's a really good kind of old school, keep it simple way to color grade, is to kind of go back to that way of working. And this fantastic thing, I would have loved to play with one of this old things, a color analyzer that would print the film. You'd re-expose the film, come back the next day and say, yes, it needed 2 points of blue, and that next shot needed a point of red taken out. So that was color grading back in the day. And now we've mixed the film terminology with the video terminology. So this is more my background. This is quite an old bit of kit. It's a telecine machine, so there's huge big reels of film in there, and this real time but analog standard definition. This was back in the old days, and you see there's a couple of joysticks here, which allow you to manipulate the colors. But basically, the lift, the gamma, and the gain, which is sort of dark points, mid, and highlights, controlling those was set up. That was how you would get analog video looking correct from a source from an old film. So yeah, I used to do the odd bit of film transfer back in the BBC. Huge big machines, a separate machine for the SEP mag, the magnetic audio and magnetic tape with the audio. You'd sync them both up, you'd press a button, and then invariably one of them would snap. It was scary.
Yeah. Delicate procedure.
Yeah, exactly. But it's great now. Nowadays you scan the film in to a file, and then that DPX file or whatever format you're using, you manipulate it. You've got essentially all of those tools, mimicking the old film times, the video tools, and a whole bunch more. Throw it in the computer, and we can do anything.
Magic happens.
Magic happens, exactly.
Yes.
But of course, until 8-9 years ago, maybe a bit more, you had to print it back out to film, so that even if you'd done all your digital color grading, the way it was shown in the cinema was on a piece of film, so it had to be printed out to film. Really, the good thing that the 3D cinema did was that that really did away with film exhibition, which is great because it was scratchy and horrible. And when we went to digital projection, no looking back there really. So that's where you mentioned the DCP. That's how cinemas receive their files, not with an old bit of film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so really since 2000 is where this the idea of digital color grading came in. That was the first movie to be entirely digitally color corrected. Up until then, it was a mix of film and photochemical processes. But brother, where art thou? Apparently, the leaves looked completely wrong for the part of the world it was, and they wanted to color grade every shot of the film, and that's the first film that ever did it. So
I did not know that.
And who did it? Christopher Nolan. He still will do his films as a photochemical process and display them in certain cinemas that still have film projectors. But apart from him and Tarantino, nobody else does it. So it's actually quite a niche thing to not be digitally color grading. We could talk a little bit about a LUT. You might have heard these things, a lookup table, just very simple mathematical set of numbers, red, green, and blue. For every permutation of red, green, and blue going into this big long, there's about 4,000 lines of just table of colors. For every possible red, green, and blue in, you get a red, green, and blue out. So it expects an certain input of color, and it will give you a certain output of color. So that's good for emulating a film stock to make it look like it was Kodak, but it obviously wasn't. You can get creative LUTs that just give it a nice look, and you can get for calibration of a monitor. So the use of LUTs is it's an important thing to sort of understand and know its limitations, and the maths of the software is getting cleverer now, and in a way they're being superseded by some very clever color space transform maths instead. So
does that then apply to a lot of the procedural shows that have a look, and they do 23 episodes a year, and so there needs to be, with the turnover of maybe 10 days of turning around an episode or 2 weeks, that these are the essential filters through which we see this world, that we're always going to be in this color space. And people will notice it doesn't change from week to week. There's always there's a way that SVU looks. There's a way that that Marvel's series look, that they have to pass through that filter of the world, and that the LUTs can help us get there a little bit faster. Is that?
On shows like that, I was listening to an interview the other day about Ozark. They would have a show LUT, a look for the majority of it, but then when they go to the Mexico scene, and you'll all have seen this kind of thing pushed too far, probably in other shows, they will have a different LUT, and they will have. It needn't be actually a LUT. It's a look that they have crafted over a long time, and then they'll say, right, this is the look for this geographical area or this flashback,
Hmm.
and then this is another one, and then assuming that that is fed with the correctly exposed pictures that are already balanced, then it will give you the correct look for the show, or that kind of sub part of the show. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that brings me on to the subject of there's color correction and there's color grading. People often make that distinction, whether those are technically correct words, but yeah, there's matching shots, exposing them correctly, making them look technically right, and all important is that they flow together. So the shot of one person and then the over the shoulder looking the other way, it doesn't look like they're in entirely different time, even though there might have been. I mean, you've probably shot things which you do one angle in the morning and you shoot the other angle in the afternoon, but you have to make them look like they were
Hmm.
at the same time, or you do it both at the same time, but they happen to not be the same brand of camera. And if they don't match, that's so that's your sort of color correction. And then, as you were saying about a kind of overarching look and feel of a show, like a show light or a look, that's the what people kind of refer to as the color grade, the look. I will. Oh, that's a grading theatre I worked in way back. Kind of thing like we were talking about. I usually grade on a monitor in front of me, but occasionally I've graded in a grading theatre, obviously with the lights turned out.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll skip over these. Yeah, the what I was talking about before about the different technology of film workflows getting absorbed into episodic TV, and also video workflows and tools being absorbed into movie making. So it's kind of all coming together.
Hmm.
Um, I won't get heavily into what RAW is all about, but these terms, knowing, does your camera shoot log? Does it shoot RAW? If it does shoot RAW, have you decoded it into log? So there's lots of things that you need to just be aware of, like you were saying. You have to at least know what you don't know. So
Right. Right.
ask the questions. Yeah, the thing about RAW is what was traditionally locked and burned in, kind of locked into a file once it was recorded. Um, like I was saying, that you have to on an older style camera, you might have to make that decision. I'm going to overexpose the background because I need to see the foreground
Right.
subject. But with RAW, there's almost nothing is locked into the file. We get to change the ISO of the film. I'll use inverted commas for that. We get to decide afterwards, so although those things were always traditionally set in the camera, we can change them. We could choose if we want to change them in post by
Hmm.
using a RAW format. We'll talk about different gamma and getting that wide exposure latitude that film cameras used to be able to capture, and that most good cameras now can capture. How do you get that into that ratio of the darkest to the brightest thing in a scene? How do you manipulate that to a regular TV, an iPhone, which they get really bright now? So you've got
Right.
HDR on your iPhone, a regular a cinema display is only it's not very bright. You're lucky in New York City, you've got some Dolby Vision cinemas, so that's yet another part of the part of the craft of and the science of getting that exposure correct for the correct display.
Hmm.
Yeah, this is all old stuff. Oh yeah, one thing to be aware of: different software uses a crazy different amount of different terms. So I'm using DaVinci Resolve. I'm a trainer in this, and I think it's great because it does a bit of everything. I think it's fantastic software. But I've used Adobe, I've used Avid Systems, and be aware of what the tool actually does, because in one software they might call lift, it raises up the shadows and largely leaves everything else alone. In another software they might call that offset. Exposure is called offset here, so or it's called printer lights. So different software, they may do the same thing, they may do something different. So be careful. And I always I just put a boring old black to white kind of gradient through it, and I just play with the controls to see what they do if
Yeah.
there's any doubt.
And so here, though, you're using in DaVinci the lift, gamma, and the gain as the shadows, the medium, and the light,
The
the
midtones,
highlight,
yeah, you could think of it as shadows, midtones,
midtone.
highlights. And if I press a button here, yeah, I've got a panel in front of me, so I can kind of move things without moving the mouse. This actually has something called shadows, midtones, highlights, but they're very more targeted. It only moves the shadows and it only moves the highlights, whereas the lift control, it raises everything. I'll show you in a minute. It raises everything up, but it will leave the white point alone. So they're much broader controls, and that's always my my sort of takeaway of telling anyone about the color tools. Do the least you can.
Right.
Don't just dive in and start pulling the picture apart. Do the least that it needs. And actually, the printer lights, the old, effectively what the film guys had, that is the least amount of manipulation. You're just one point of blue. The blue channel just all moves up. You haven't put any contrast in it, and that sometimes that's all it needs. But then you might want to get into what they call secondary fixing, and get finer and finer tweaks to get two shots to match, for instance. So,
Just a little zhuzh is where we want to start. Just a little bit of
yeah,
enough.
just the bare minimum, but this fantastic Ansel Adams black and white photo here, I always use that as an example of, it's all about contrast. The actual, although color, we're talking about color grading, but so much of the quality of an image comes from the contrast, the black and white component. And I think Ansel Adams used to play around in the dark room with his film and exposing prints, dodge and burn, these things that are, they're Photoshop techniques, but they came from still photography in the dark room, getting these the tonal range of the black and white correct. So it's super important to pay attention to the black and white, although we're talking about color.
Mm-hmm.
um, I'll always show this this little thing. You may have seen it before. Your eyes can be fooled. We assume that this is a white square in the shadow of this object. You can see my
Mm-hmm.
mouse, all right? Can you?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this is a dark square that's not in the shadow. But if I go like there, you can actually see the
Ooh,
context. They are exactly the same color.
no.
So your eye will fool you. I mean, it's the red, sorry, the gold blue dress from a few years ago.
Oh God, that whole
You know,
fiasco.
yeah, your eye and brain, they'll fool you. They try to make sense of what's going on in context, and if you're color grading and staring at one image for long enough, you'll think, yeah, actually that looks great. Yeah, I'm really pleased with that. That looks, perfectly acceptable. And then you go away and back and you think, oh my God, it's 5 times more orange than the
Yes.
last shot. What was I thinking? So you can't really look at any one shot for more than probably under a minute, and your eyes start to color balance. So you need to. okay, if you're messing with some tools trying to finesse one tiny part of it, you may have to, but you have to wind back in the film, play through a few shots, make sure everything matches, and then you might find that you've gone down a totally wrong path if you've been staring at it for too long.
That's so interesting.
So I've got a bunch of still frames here, which maybe it's a good talking point really. I'm going to bring up my scopes here. These are different ways to measure the image, but I'm going to just put it down. I usually have this on a secondary screen over on one side, but if I just pull this over here, and we can analyze these. So I'm going to have a vector scope over here, and this shows the amount of color and the so the saturation and the hue of any color, and this is showing me the luminance and the red, the green, and the blue. So it's quite interesting to keep an eye on these. And if you always break down any image, talk about hue, saturation, and luminance, you can identify exactly what you're talking about. So the hue is it pointed towards the, if I do something crazy with my controls here, is the hue over towards the red, or is it round to the blue, or round to the green? And the luminance is how bright it is. And if I just reset that, the saturation is if it's a tiny dot in the middle of this, there is no color. And if I wind up the saturation, you see things are pushing out towards the edge of this. So I can make that a very saturated red and put it in that red zone over there, or a saturated blue, or just dial it back. And in fact, the look of this this particular still that I've got from YouTube or somewhere, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, I think that it's quite, as you'll see, it's quite desaturated. It's toward the black and white. So another look there. So a lot of this is the tonal, the black and white element is what's giving it its feel, and really limited color sort of palette over there. This is a really good series. I don't know if you've seen this one. It's called The Bridge, and it's about a bridge between Denmark and Sweden, and I think it's a Danish program. I don't know. It's got subtitles, but well worth the watch. But you see, it's very flat and desaturated. There's no color in there really.
Cool as well, right?
Yes, a little bit towards the cooler tones. Now, if I just press this button here and put 1 point of, have I got my printer lights turned on? Let me just check. If I turn that on, and I've got a shortcut key which can add red in the printer lights, a red offset. So if I just reset that, I could take, if you think that's cool, I could take out a point or two of blue, put overall, and then just go. And that looks broadly the same, but that's the difference I've done to it if I just turn everything on and off. So they're very subtle differences. What else have we got in here? Okay, so this is really nice look in this film. I often refer to Sicario. But again, it's all over toward the yellow in that scene, but really fairly, apart from a yellow cast to the whole thing, is not a lot of color contrast. There's nothing else blue in there. It's all living in that same part of the color wheel, and that's reflected here. That there's the highlights. There's not so much blue as there is red and green. What else have we got here? I love the look of this. It's a quite an old show, but it was called The Devil's Whore. Excellent colorist, and every shot in it looked like some oil painting. Just looked really nice. Another one of the bridge, the Matrix. We'll recognize that.
Very green tones.
Yeah, and I think I'm looking at that, and because it's an overall greenish thing, I would say, and I'm pretty sure this was 1999, wasn't it? So this would have been largely,
Or
a photochemical thing. So printer lights would have absolutely been how they, in post in the film days, how they manipulated that. So if I take out green or add magenta, I should be able to balance that back out a little bit. So the black in the suit and the white in the shirt are actually then fairly
true.
neutral.
Hmm.
Whereas that's where it started. Just going to turn on. I don't normally work like this. Where am I? There's a neat little thing that I should just turn on called display qualifier focus. So if I make sure that I've got my qualifier turned on, there we go. I don't know if you can see as I move my mouse around, I get this little dancing dot over
Hmm.
so that's quite a nice tool to use. So if I just place my my qualifier eyedropper there, you can see that those highlights are in fact there's a bit more blue than there is red or green the way I've done it, whereas over here now the green is definitely the prominent color there. Nice little tool, especially when learning your way around the colors.
Hmm.
That's another, it's like an oil painting, that show.
Truly.
Really, really nice, but quite a cast, a yellowish, warm cast in the shadows. The highlights are a little bit warm as well, so I think that's probably not from the film The Matrix. I think that's an on-set photo, I'm
Hmm.
not sure.
Hmm.
Another one of The Matrix. I love this show, Orphan Black. Very, very cool. And this is what you'll see here is this sort of teal and orange thing. And although it's become a bit of a cliche, there's sense to it, and it was built into, to a certain extent, it was built into old film stocks. It narrows down the color palette to a skin tone, and I'm going to turn on my skin tone indicator, which is this hue. Most people's skins, be they dark or light or pale or saturated, they are most of the time around about this line here.
Hmm.
So I could change the overall hue, and you'll see as it moves around how I'm moving it there, doing crazy. But the skin tone is your sort of orange, and then a complementary color to that is the teal,
Uh-huh.
the cyan. So that's why a lot of films will use that to one degree or another. Maybe desaturate it quite a lot, but they're again, strong oranges, strong bluish cyan, and you'll see that. Look out for the sea or the sky on a kind of blockbuster feel. Well, no, on lots of different shows or films, it's not. It's often not a very pure blue. It will be just swung a little bit round to magenta, to cyan, and those skin tones remain somewhere along that line, and that's cultural. I think people tend to prefer just one way, a sort of slightly pinker magenta look sometimes, and other cultures or other moods like to swing the skin tones a little bit towards this sort of round anti-clockwise around here to the yellow or green direction. What else do we have here? This is obviously a composite. I've often brought this one up from that same show, and actually this has been photoshopped because you could see that the key light is coming from a different direction on half these people.
Right.
So I
Right.
think this is a cheat, but it looks nice. So that is something I can't change in post production. I can't say, well, look, the key light on from this angle is falling on someone's face on one side, the other side is in shadow. that's onset, that's lighting, you know, because this has been photoshopped. They've done then you're into visual effects and compositing, but that's not a color grade.
Right. So it's obvious because of that they're not in the same room because the light isn't coming from the same direction on all of the faces.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
cannot
So
change.
that's a total cheat. Took me a long time to notice that when I brought that as an example.
Yes.
But something else to look at, though. I mean, the quality of this light. It looks like a big soft light source, like a window. It's not a spotlight with a big shine on her forehead and harsh shadows. They're very soft shadows. So, and there's a reasonable amount of fill light in this side of the face. So, the quality of that is really set in the lighting. And there's a certain amount you can do in post, because it's really hard to change the direction of the light, though.
Can I ask, is it for you, this might be a case by case basis, but is it harder to pull from where there is no light, or is it harder to reduce if something is overexposed? Is it harder to bring light down in terms of what you can fix?
Yes, I would say, as a rule of thumb, if you've underexposed and your shadows and the detail that you would ideally want to see is sort of below that noise floor, in with just the grain and the the digital noise that is so dark, that it's hidden amongst that noise. And then you say, actually, can we boost up those this side of the face or these shadows? Try and boost them up, and there's nothing there. It's tiny amount of detail, and then you're boosting up the noise, and the grain looks horrible. I mean,
And then
film
that
grain is one thing, but
doesn't that make the blacks grainy a little bit too, because you're starting to
yes, yeah,
bring in color that isn't there?
exactly. Whereas going the other way, as long as you haven't clipped out those bright highlights, and destroyed any detail like in a sky and the cloud, and if you have, I mean, that's maybe not that important. It's nice to have it, but if you are then bringing that light down, that is an easier job. I think I'm right in saying that day for night scene in the last Mad Max movie. It's really blue and stylized, fantastic look to it. But I think they overexposed by a stop. They're going to. Had to be for. They knew it was going to be a night scene, but they overexposed, knowing that they would capture all those shadows, which were going to be important. And then in post, they brought it all down, put a blue cast over it. Whereas if you underexpose, you've kind of limited yourself. So
Is it possible, say, to the left side? I know this is not a real picture. We could try it with one of the others, but where it's really dark to the left of Dominic West, is it possible to bring up light in that area? That's changing your lift, or is it always global?
Yeah, that is. This is why you shoot log, because this particular image, it's like it's committed. It is. It was designed to look correct. I can't even remember where I nicked it from on
Sure.
the internet. It was designed to be displayed on a certain display, and now I'm trying to change it and manipulate it. There is no detail in there. Whereas if I had a log image, I might choose to put it down there, but then someone would say, "Well, actually, could you bring up the midtones and the gamma?" And I can manipulate it afterwards, but there's just nothing to play with here. So yeah, interesting question though.
Indeed. So if are there places where you could localize, say, in places where you talk about a window blowing something out? Is it possible to highlight the window and bring the window space down?
Yeah, you can. What you don't want to have to do is like draw around a person, like rotoscope it. Put a mask around
Yeah.
the person so that they're exposed a little bit brighter, and then you're pulling down the highlights in the window. But you can do just a really soft little. How are we doing for time? I'll move on, and maybe show you that very quickly. But yes, you could just choose to just pull down that fine control of just the highlights and pull them back down, and you'll get that detail. I was just going to show you here the jeans here, your classic teal orange. That jeans are normally kind of blue, but on a film they tend to swing round to cyan, so that's that bit right there towards.
And then you've got your oranges in the back.
Yeah, exactly. Bit of the bridge. That's all nice and colourful. A bit more classic teal and orange. Yeah. Now this was designed. The look of this show, brown wood, red hair, blue jeans. This was a lot of this show. It was just actually on set. Everything was teal and orange, but it just looked really nice.
I see it now.
Yeah. And that's just super colourful. So I will just, if we've got time, how are we doing for time? If we have time, I'm just going to show you. This was a really interesting example of what you were talking about, how you might want to light something differently. If you've got a super load of big budget, you can gel these lights in the background. But the DP who shot this, I thought he obviously knew what he was doing, but why is it so green? And he said these lights in the background were putting a green cast, but he wanted more light in the room, so he put green gel on his production lights and lit the thing. But he lit it all the same color temperature, like you were saying with your thing. It was if he'd have put tungsten lights on, and then the background was a different color temperature, it would have been impossible for me to fix. But it did throw up some challenges. So however much blue I tried to add, it looked wrong. So I had to play around with this for quite a long time before I thought, hold on a minute, there's a tool in here. If I've got a nice overly detailed green channel here, if I put that into the blue output, so I can put what was originally destined for the green, if I put it into the blue output, I can actually balance that out quite nicely.
Whoa!
Like that. And once I hit upon that, if you get the right tool for the job, it's all good. And he had definitely done me a favor, because this is now the same color under these artificial, with these practical lights. This is now the same color largely as these, which were from the production lights, which he gelled green. So
wow, that's quite a difference.
Yeah, big difference.
It's knowing how to achieve the result, and also the fact that he set you up. And I think that's so important. What we were talking about before is that if you can get your DP to talk to your colorist, if that relationship can be established ahead of time, to make sure that they know what the look of the world is going to be and how they plan to achieve it, as well as with what's available to you on set. If you are bringing in lights, but like he said, if he wants the overhead lights to be on, then he needed to know well enough to make sure that those lights weren't mixing their color temperature to create a complete nightmare for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well
and with the big budget things, all the practical lights are on a dimmer. They might gel them. They might gel the windows. But smaller budget, you haven't got the budget to do that, and so you need to keep it in mind for what problems that may or may not cause in post. Yeah.
And I would say it's also key, because you come around to an important point. A lot of times we realize that fundraising is difficult. Not everybody who starts an indie project has investors or executive producers right away who can come up with a lot of capital. So often we're doing Kickstarters and things like that. And then you find, like as budgets do, if you don't have a line producer who can help you have a buffer in there for what's going to happen, what are the variables that always happen? What are the extra cab rides amount to that you have because you had a late night shoot and it really went over, and then you had to send everyone home with gear at the end of the night? Or what about parking or things that you haven't planned for? Sometimes those budgets shrink during production to the point where then you get to the end of post and you say, oh, I have $200 left. Gee, I hope I can do color correction. That's not how that works,
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately.
Like we were saying, keeping that ratio of having enough for post. If you've had to cut corners on set, it's really important that you then have that, because if if there wasn't time or equipment to go and just throw an extra light somewhere, then you definitely need to spend some time doing a bit more work in post, and that's actually a sensible way to do it. But
Mhm.
knowing where to assign that, and don't just blow all the money on one shot with because you wanted to use a crane or a dolly or something.
Course. Well, and I
Um,
would say as a producer, probably it's about setting realistic goals. Perhaps if you do have executive producers, folks who are investing, you can say that this amount, this investment at this time is going to get us through production. And then we set a new goal, which is our post production budget, so that we keep that separate and we're not trying to pull from the same kitty. Or
mhm.
we make sure that we have that money set aside and we know that this amount of money within our budget is for post, and that if we need more money during production, we have to fundraise or ask for more at that time. But I know that people often come to you with empty pockets and say, please fix all the mistakes that we made, and that's just not, it's not how it works.
Yeah,
Really.
and it's a shame, because they're the hardest jobs, really, the ones that haven't had the budget throughout.
Right.
And a big high budget movie is actually quite easy to color grade, because it was all it was all done on set. Yeah,
Right, because there's time. I mean, I think some of it with indie too is that there's kind of guerrilla filmmaking that happens on the street. And for part of the shot, the sun was out, and then all of a sudden,
mm,
in the middle of the shot the take that they love, the sun went behind a cloud. So where do
mm,
you find things like that where you have to kind of within a take? Is it better
absolutely.
to cut around that or to try to color correct if light
Yeah,
goes away?
every shot is different. Everything. I mean, this is why they might, at a bigger budget, they might have said, "Look, we're not going out today. It's too sunny. Clouds are coming and going. We want to just a nice overcast all day. We'll shoot like that. And we won't have any problems."
Right,
So, but if I'm presented with something like that, then you just have to do the best you can. We've got a
right,
lot of tools, but it won't be easy. It could take a couple of days, or a day to fix a shot or something. And it might never look perfect
what do
if
you
that's
think
the
that
shot you have to have.
right. What do you think are the most common mistakes that newer creators make that they don't have to? That suddenly you're having to explain at the end, in post production. If you had done it this way, I could have done this, but that's no longer available to us. Are there common mistakes in that vein?
One that I've come across, that like we were talking about light levels. It just skimping on the lighting, and me trying to deal with, like, there's just one bright light, a key light, and they say, there, we've lit it. And that's really, really difficult. If you want that really high contrasty thing, one key light, no fill, fantastic. But chances are you don't. And like I say, I'm digging out of the shadows, and there's just this mush and grain there. That is really, really difficult. But on the other hand, if you've got it broadly nicely lit, but there's just one little corner of the room that needs lifting up a little bit, that's the kind of thing I can just I could put a secondary color grade on, put a window, and just highlight something fairly quickly, um, and it's quite a quick and easy thing to do. So I could just say, all right, that guy's a bit in darkness there, and that looks like he's got his own little spotlight, but in fact I just did that now. That's quick and easy to do, um, given that you've got it broadly there on set. So
But that's
knowing
the
that,
point is if sorry, if it's lit to begin with, that there is
yeah,
distinction. Because if he was even further in shadow, you wouldn't be able to pull him out without making that obvious.
no, exactly. Yeah. So knowing where to take the time on set with your lighting, and where actually you could save a bit of time because you can fix it. Do X, Y, Z. You can do in post production. So having a little bit of an idea, and get a DP to talk to the colorist. Really,
Right.
yeah. Are there any questions come in? How are we doing?
Not at the moment. If anybody is tuning in at the moment and has questions for Jamie about coloring, I know he'd be happy to answer them for you. Please just make sure that you add your name so that we know who we're addressing. But in the meantime, I'd love to know a little bit about contracts for post. What is it that's important for you to know ahead of time and to have in the contract? What the timeline is, how many rounds of notes?
The things that I always ask are, how many rounds of notes? That's a good one. And I've forgotten to ask that before, but I always do now. It's working remotely, which I do a lot. I was working even before lockdown. I was sending things for approval, and there's a whole world of issues there about what your client is looking at it on. Don't just look at it one day on an iPhone and say, "Oh, that's too dark," and then next time you approve something, you're in an office on a TV or an iPad. Or try to be consistent about how you're reviewing them. Otherwise, you'll be into all sorts of tweak this bit darker, make that bit lighter, and then back where you started. So definitely nailing that down. And the questions I always ask is, what's the camera format? So if it was a high quality, like a camera that shoots raw format, you can manipulate that a lot. If it's something like a fairly basic, like a Sony DSLR, that heavily compresses the footage, then you've got to be careful with that, and I can't manipulate that in a way that's even more important, that you light it just right. So I'll always say, what was it shot on? What was it edited on? Because there's a few issues about how I import the edit into my system. These days, I would recommend edit on DaVinci Resolve, because then there's no issue about me opening the project and now I can grade it. If you edit on Adobe or Avid, then I've got to do a few little bits and pieces that just adds to the work. That's just conforming and recreating the edit. And then where is it going to go to? What's the primary place it's being exhibited? So is that just the web? Is it for broadcast? If so, which broadcaster? Because they publish all their specifications, or is it the web and DCP? So and for me, timescales as well, because there's sometimes I like to work on a little indie film, and I love doing that, and I learn from it, and but I can't necessarily turn work away at a broadcast post house in London if I'm doing it on a smaller budget. So I'll say, yeah, I'll do it on a smaller budget, but I'll fit it around my other work, and it will take me, leave it with me for the month. Whereas in theory, if somebody paid top rate card, walk into a color suite and it should be done in a day, and they sign it off in the room there and then, job done all in the day. But so it really depends on the budget, and if you're working remotely or sitting there with the colorist, how I would set the budget for it. Yeah.
We had a guest on my show, Scribble and Point, who I adore. He's a director and writer and artist, Johnny Salmon, who is on the BBC right now. I think BBC Three, with his show that started out as an indie show and then now is Dreaming Whilst Black on the BBC. And his little triangle that I love was good, quick, and cheap. And he said it can be good and cheap. It can be quick and good, but it won't be cheap, right? You can only have two.
Yes.
Good, cheap, and quick. So
and that's absolutely true. And that's what I sort of say. I don't use the word cheap. I say inexpensive.
Of course.
We have to change that.
Yes.
But if I'm in my home grading suite, and it won't be fast. It will be good. I won't compromise on that. It'll be as good as I can get it. But then I can do cheap because it won't be fast.
Right.
If you want it quickly and good, then you have to go to a high-end grading suite, and you sit there and it gets done in a day, and you pay top dollar for it. So,
So that's a great thing to keep in mind in terms of setting your goals and your timelines, and reverse engineering. If we want to premiere on this date, then we must have completed post by this date, and we must have requested post by this date. And those are all conversations that are so important between producers and those of you doing post, because certainly there can be a lot of lines crossed where folks don't understand what those timelines need to look like, because every project is the producer's most urgent task, right? But that's not true for you. It can't be for you. They can't all be top priority.
No, I used to hear that from dubbing mixers more than colorists and finishing editors. Well, I guess it's hand in hand, but audio, it's like one of the final things that can be done to something. And every single job that comes through the door, you're doing the final finishing. Then that's not the same for the producer who's been working on something, building up to that final finishing day for months or years. But that's our job, audio and color grading, finishing side of things. It's we always deal with that end part of the project.
Right. And those finishing touches are so important, because I think everybody is capable of making content now. You can make content on your phone, but having those finishing touches sets the quality apart from everything else. I know for myself, and for most in the industry, if it's grainy sound, if it's really uneven and not balanced, if it hasn't been smoothed out, I'm not listening for very long, because it's distracting, right?
Yeah, even as a colorist, I would say bad sound kills it more than anything else.
Right.
Definitely, even worse than bad color. But
just even a light touch of color to balance things out, to kind of create a tone of the world for your characters, right? If you're creating something and you're able to, with wigs and costumes, created something in the 70s, but that everything looks like it's right now, if it doesn't have sort of that sepia vibe, right, of the 70s, we've seen a lot of things, Argo and others, look like a little bit yellow or orange.
Mimicking an old film stock.
Right. So if you aren't able to give it that, then you've kind of taken away some of that credibility. So it's just that finishing touch of making sure that what you shot and the world that you are trying to create and tell your story in are all aligned. And so it's worth it that you budget for that and plan for that, and do your best to have those conversations ahead of time, so that you can set yourself up optimally and make the turnover, the timeline at the end, when you actually do have the project in hand, that much quicker, because you've effectively edited out the points of failure as best you can.
Very
in the
true.
way that you shoot it, right?
I like to think one project that I worked on, it wasn't a high budget, and I heard some review of it, and they said, this thing, it felt like a high budget thing. It just had that feel. And I thought, do you know what? I think I was pleased with the color grade, and I think it had this overly used term, cinematic. It was quite a filmic look. And that was the impression, a kind of subconscious, subliminal impression that somebody had got from it. Whereas if they just said, oh, well, we won't bother, we'll just, the editor's not great on color grading, but we'll get them to do it in the edit, it wouldn't have had that extra something that that made it feel high budget when it wasn't. So that's where the added value comes in.
It really does elevate it. It gives it a level of polish that is very subtle, but we respond to it. We watch the things that don't look like our friends just shot this weekend and put it right online. We watch the things that have that little bit of extra polish, I think a little bit longer, because we have such short attention spans now. We can scroll through things on Facebook or YouTube and watch for 10 seconds and move on. TikTok, 30 seconds. Any of those things, we have such a short attention span. So the thing that's going to keep you there is the quality,
Yeah.
the audio and the visual. So,
And more people are doing this. When I was explaining log capture and things like that, teaching people color grading 10 to 12 years ago, nobody knew about it, but everyone, a lot of people are doing it to some degree or another. And if you're the one who doesn't, it's going to reflect badly on your project, really.
right. And if somebody truly is starting out and doesn't have the budget, are there certain things that they should pay attention to if they're trying to work on it in their own edit? That the saturation, the luminance that we talked about, the hue, are those the things
Um,
they want to focus on?
well, understanding and analyzing an image and saying, why is that one wrong? What don't I like about it?
Hmm.
It does help. I mean, if you're working with a colorist who knows how to interpret more artistic things, it's actually, in a way, it's better to just talk about, look, what mood do I want this to be, rather than getting into the fine details of hue, saturation, luminance. But if you're trying to fix something, and you're doing it yourself, you have to look and think, well, the hue and the saturation of this guy's, the shadows here on this guy's suit, what's wrong with them? There's a sort of a green cast on it. Then what's the tool to do that? And I think the other big one is that where you apply your transformation to get from your log image. Have I got one on here? Well, that isn't log, but it is quite flat. Where you do that transformation to get it looking good on your HD TV screen, and where you do your corrections either before or after that. So that's an important thing. Things can just, if you're not careful, you'll end up with that scenario of the blown out window, but the face looks okay. Whereas if you are careful of the order that things happen, you can raise up the face, and the highlights just get just compressed in a filmic kind of fashion, and the log to the video conversion will help you with that if you understand the order that things are happening. So know the signal part. I mean, I've got things I can show you, but I'm aware that we're running out of time. So.
Well, we may need to have a part two, and
Oh
certainly
well,
let us
yeah.
know if there's a part two that people are interested in, because there are so many details to consider. It's in the same way when I can do my own makeup, but then when I sit with someone who is doing HMU on set, I realize why there are people who do just that, because they understand it on another level than I do, where I might be able to play with a filter on Instagram, but it's not the same thing as coloring my own 20 episode project. There's a reason that people specialize in these things, because it is so detailed and because there are so many different nuances.
Mm.
And I think even just knowing that when you're exporting, you have to always export the highest quality version, right? In the same way that people that are sharing headshot files and things like that, you want to share the one that has the most information and not the distilled version, and then try to blow that up and lose all of the adjustments that you've made. So
yeah, definitely. Working on low quality footage while you're editing is absolutely a sensible idea. You can edit on a laptop, that's all fine. But as a finishing editor and as a colorist, you want to go back to the best quality original file that is available.
mhm.
And not just, well, these look okay, I'll grade that, and then you find when you're manipulating the image, it won't look its best. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for your time. This is endlessly
Pleasure.
fascinating.
Pleasure.
And
As I say, there was loads more I was hoping
I
to show
know, of
you,
course,
but we,
and that's the thing. So maybe we'll do round two in the
yeah,
new year, and take a look at some more specific images. And certainly, we hope that our audience will bring us questions then, and see what little tips and tricks we can learn from you.
fantastic. Yeah, my
Thank you
pleasure.
so much. We appreciate you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.